Okay, hello everyone. We are now recording this session. We have just come back from breakout groups discussing professional beliefs based on what has been done in individual assignments. So, giving some feedback about what you liked about what your partner was saying and what some suggestions for to um, I guess to provide a bit more depth or all sorts of things I'm sure you discussed during your breakout group. Okay, so the focus of this session is on observation. So, in the lecture this week, we talked about big R research and little R research. Who can tell me what the difference is between big R and little R research from what you learnt in the lecture?
Little
Kiana?
r is observations and
Yep.
big R is academic research.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah, summed up. That's excellent. So, big R research it requires formal ethics approval, and it would also require a specific methodology, data collection, and data analysis methods as well. But if little r research, observation, is done adequately, done well with a purpose and with intent, it also needs a methodology, a framework. So, including data collection and, of course, analysis of that data as well. So, your little r research that might involve observations in your learning environment. So, this could be the approaches and strategies used by your supervising teacher out on placement. It could be resources used. It could be the layout of the environment, behavior management strategies used. So there are so many different things that you can observe. You can also observe the learners in the environment. This will be a big part of your placements. So, collecting data to develop a really good understanding of their interests, of their needs, their strengths, their particular understandings or not understanding, possibly, frustrations, challenges, and of course, their ways of learning as well. So, really effective, objective observation and also listening skills, they're going to become the most valuable tool as both a beginning teacher and a practicing teacher in the future as well. So, during your professional experiences, your placements over the next 4 years, you're going to be working hard to practice and refine these skills and also your understandings around observation as well. So, we in your pre workshop PowerPoint, there was a clip that we asked you to watch, and it was about peer observation. So, from what you've just done with your tag feedback, which is peer observation in a way, or peer feedback, um, it's really important that we have these conversations with teachers, with each other, just to compare, to provide another perspective on our practice. So the two teachers, or there were more teachers in this Indigenous school, they used peer observation to help improve their practice. So, from watching the clip, what did the teachers, how did they use peer observation to improve their practice? What did you think from watching the clip? Any thoughts? You can always type into the chat as well. What were the main things that you noticed? What did they talk about in terms of peer observation and the benefits of it? Any thoughts? No, I guess one of the things that I really noticed was they all talked about developing strong teams and communities of practice. So working together, um, I guess, to develop continuity of practice as well. And especially if you're team teaching, like in the case of two of the teachers working together, you would need to use similar strategies. So you would need to really discuss exactly what you're going to do in your environment, what your goals are, what your beliefs are behind that goal. Um, I think they really saw peer observation and feedback as part of ongoing, excuse me, professional learning as well. So professional learning, as you would have researched in your for your assessment task, it can be formal or it can be informal. It's not just going out on professional development. It's about what you learn in your environment as well, in your classroom or your learning environment. So this could involve observation, and often does. It could involve summative or formative assessment. So any forms of collecting data to help your understandings of the children's learning and of your particular practice. So I noticed as well that they did refer once to the standards in goal setting. So goal setting for the students, but also goal setting for teachers as well, because the standards are very much the basis of our teaching practice. So that's very important that we use these when we're setting goals for our practice.
And can I just say, I also found it really interesting. It was almost used as a tool of reassurance as well, I found. I forget the lady's name. However, the way that she was so relieved and reactive to the feedback, it just made her feel like she was on the correct path, that she wasn't straying. So it can be used as that reassurance, I guess.
That's a really good point, Emma. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so Claire has noted here that they watched a video of their teaching back together and evaluated how their actions affected the student and got feedback on this. Yeah, so it was very much a lot of time, you know, as busy teachers, you don't have time to go into other teachers' classrooms and watch their teaching. A lot of teachers use swivels. So these are cameras that you can have on a tripod. Some of them are even like a little iPhone that you can wear, and it actually monitors everything that you're doing. The swivel actually moves with you. So it is attracted by movement. And so then you can watch it back, or you can yourself and evaluate your practice, or you can watch it, get someone else, another teacher, to watch it for you and give you some feedback as well. So Joey said able to observe small and minor things in class. That is a really good point, Joey, that the teacher mentioned, because it's often those small things that we neglect, or that we're not conscious of, those habits that we guess that we use. Like I notice I very rarely listen back to the recordings that I do for this workshop and many others, because it drives me crazy listening to my own voice. And I say the same thing all the time, like or okay, or so, you know, you pick up these, you pick up these crazy habits. And by recording, by videoing, you can really see some of those habits that you've got into. And it could even be something like you might spend more time answering questions for girls than for boys, or you might neglect a certain area of the room for one reason or another. And we're going to do some observations soon, or the observation that I asked you to take in terms of questioning and answering. But these sorts of observations about specific small minor things in class makes such a difference, because it's these minor things that end up having very big impacts on your practice. All right, so thank you for those of you that shared your insights. All right. So, in your preparation PowerPoint, you were provided with 3 practice observation clips, and you were asked to choose 2 to focus on. I'd be happy if you just chose 1, but you know, if you could have chosen 2, that would have been really good. So, we gave you some questions to frame your observations, like I discussed in the lecture. So in a moment, we're going to go through your observations and we're going to compare the data that you collected and analyze the data to see, what you actually can use could use in professional practice. So, when observing children or students or your supervising teacher, it's really important that you have a clear and very specific focus or reason for the observation. So, a purpose or an intent. And this is what the framing of the observation that I talked about in the lecture is all about. Because, as pointed out in the moonwalking bear clip in the lecture, um, when there's so much going on, it's really easy to miss important aspects. And we also have to consider that it's possible to view or to observe the same event from a variety of perspectives. So there was a clip, the secondary clip that we provided. We've actually used that previously, and I use it in quite a few of my units, but looking at different areas. So you really can focus on a variety of perspectives, but having a specific focus in mind for your particular observation is vital. You really need to limit it to one specific area. So the next thing you need to do is to choose what format or tool you'd like to use in your observation. So use to record your data. And as I demonstrated in the lecture and in the examples today, often you'll have to develop these yourself. And so this is part of teaching. This is part of little R research as well as big R research, having those tools to support your observation, your evaluation of what's happening in your learning environment. And when you go out on professional experience, you're going to be gathering these. You're going to be, as I talked about in a previous lecture, you're going to be lyrebirds, collecting all sorts of resources and information, tools. You might be, as well as tools, you'll also be looking at strategies and ways of thinking and understanding as well. So this week, we looked at 2 particular formats that can be used across early childhood, primary, and also secondary. So for those of you who chose this observation, if you could pull out your data to share, that would be greatly appreciated. For this observation, your focus was around student engagement in asking questions. So you were asked to watch the clip and record data in the seating template that was available. So this was an upper primary example, but of course it could also apply to lower primary and secondary. And of course it could apply to early childhood as well, depending on what observation you were focusing on. So the purpose or the intent was in the lessons you prepare and implement, you feel like the same students ask and answer the questions you pose. You wonder if this is the case, and after discussing your concern with your supervising teacher, they actually suggest that you record a lesson to observe this in detail. So you would decide that you're going to collect data, and then you would have to analyze it and evaluate it. So this is exactly how you framed that observation. Give you a chance to refamiliarize yourself with that. So the specific why and the focus. So very specific focus that you were looking at, focus of inquiry. All right, so you watched the clip and you recorded your observation data on the template that was available on Blackboard. You inserted an asterisk next to the student's name when they answered a question and a question mark next to the student's name when they asked a question. So I want to compare the data because this is part of big R research, and also little r research is the validity of data. So comparing with a colleague perhaps to see how that, you know, what you actually noted, you need to come sort of to some sort of agreement about it. So what the first question, how many student responses did you count altogether? How many did you come up with? Anyone, just shout it out. I'll give you a chance to count them up. Come on. We would have all had different. It was quite tricky. How many did you have? No one's willing to share. That's very odd. Either you're all scaredy cats or none of you actually watched or completed the observation. Which one is it? Own up. Did anyone complete the observation? Oh, I've got in the chat. Why didn't you speak up and say, Ange, look at the chat. 23. Goodness, that's a lot. All right.
I kind of took it as any question. So it got down to like her asking Sophie if it was okay that Monique sat with her. I literally went from like,
no, well, that's good. That's good. That's really helpful information. But I think when I actually did this, I got 12, but I'm not saying that I'm correct by any means, because what I thought was not so good in this is that it needed to be more specific, the instructions. I think, you know, and possibly counting the additional questions once one question was asked. I wasn't so sure about that because what, you know, I don't know how that would assist you in your understandings. Yeah. Angela had 10. Yeah. 19, 15. Yeah. So you've all done it in different ways. And it was also quite hard. Who found it tricky? You had to watch it a few times. Yeah. Now, my big question to you, how many questions were asked? I'll look at the chat this time. How many questions did the students ask?
Oh,
Sorry.
students didn't ask any, as far as
Yes,
I
they
could get.
did.
Oh, they did?
Mm.
Okay.
A lot from the teacher, almost none from the students. Isabella, yep. I noted one. Ryan actually got up. Yeah, he asked about the papers, but it was about the equipment. It's still a question though. Yeah. Well done, Molly. Well done, Caitlin. Yeah, but so, you know, you've really got to focus and use your, you had one from Slants. Yeah, it could have been Slants or it could have been Ryan. I thought it was Ryan, and so did Molly, but it could have been Slants. Nikki didn't note any questions because it wasn't related to the work. Yeah. So see, we need very specific guidelines about the data that we're collecting. So who answered the most questions? Yeah, Vessi. And then after Vessi, I think, who was the next one? Who did I have? I had Ashley. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. But, you know, you could use this kind of template. You could use, a lot of teachers map where they're actually moving and the time that they spend in specific areas as well, which is another way of looking at how this Ashley and Vessi, because the teacher asked a lot of follow-up questions. Yeah, and it was to those particular students. All right, so in looking at our data, we've collected the data. Now I guess we have to analyze it in some way, so having a go at it. So what did you see? So we've compared data and we've come to a kind of consensus. And what did you notice about the data? So what were the particular things that you noted? If you could actually speak, that would be really good. Or if not, type. But if you could speak, that would be very helpful. What did you notice about the data? Like just basic things.
Sorry.
To start with, how many? So let's just look at only one question was asked. Two students were asked. Two students who were asked to respond to questions. Vessi were mainly follow-up questions. So that's what we noticed. So, and we've compared that data and come to some conclusions about what it specifically was. So what were the trends? Was that Isabella that was about to answer that?
Yeah, sorry.
What were the trends?
I found the same people putting up their hand and answering the questions every time.
Mhm.
I was just going to make a point of Monique in the background, how she was sitting by herself and didn't answer any questions.
Yeah.
So I thought that was quite interesting. But then at the end, the teacher sort of included her in a group, which was good
Brought her up
because she sort
and
of was
sat her chair.
interacting more.
Yeah. That
Yeah,
took a long
but-
time though, didn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, she was very much so didn't answer a single question or put her hand up either.
Yeah.
So-
That's good observation. So I wonder, what key questions do you have about the data? What questions did it raise?
I would say like just finding out whether it's that they're lacking confidence or that they're lacking the knowledge to answer the question, especially for Monique and Callum and stuff.
Yeah. Very good. What else?
I would just say, like, is this normal? Like, obviously this is this particular session she's teaching. A question would be, is this how it is in other subjects and other lessons, these same students as well?
That's a really good point, because, it was about protractors. I think making protractors engaging and interesting is a challenge. And I think it takes creativity. She tried. She had it's a pretty colour about her head. But I think my questions, what I was wondering were, why were the students not asking questions? Were the students engaged? Were they interested? Were they motivated? Was the teacher interested and motivated? Did she show enthusiasm? Were they possibly inhibited because they were being filmed? Is a question that we need to ask as well, in terms of the context and the validity of the data as well. What can you infer? Any thoughts? What can you infer from the data? So this would be questions. So I guess, and this takes a lot of practice. This is something that you would be talking with your supervising teacher about. So was the classroom culture one that encouraged inquiry? So we have to look at, it's hard to see from one particular video, but we can infer by the questioning and the attitude and the body language of the teacher and the students. Did students feel safe to ask questions to clarify their understanding? So you would assume, because no one asked questions, they all knew what they had to do. They all understood all of the concepts. Were they afraid of looking stupid? So, you know, that shame or embarrassment of being wrong, which I guess is why a lot of you don't like responding. And I get that completely. You know, that fear that we have that, oh my God, I'm going to look stupid in front of everyone, or what I say is not going to be right, or, you know, will I be judged? So it's about creating that environment, which is extremely difficult in a Zoom session when you only see each other once a week. But in a classroom, you can create that environment. You can develop those relationships, the trust with the students. So did the students actually understand the questions that the teacher was asking? Did the teacher check for understanding? Did she move around the room once she set the task? So she set, you know, she talked about it and then she set them a task and gave them instructions. What did she do straight away after she set the task? Can you remember? What did you observe her doing? Anyone remember? She turned her back and cleaned the blackboard. So really, in that situation, when you set a task, you need to immediately walk around the room. You need to make eye contact with the students. You need to touch their work. You need to look at their body language. So, you know, that over the shoulder marking is really important. You don't necessarily want to interrupt them, but you certainly want to be there, available for them to ask questions. And I guess that comes down to knowing your students and how they learn. So it's a really vital step when you've actually provided a task for students to do. You need to be available for them to ask questions. So if you were this pre-service teacher and we've made some inferences about the data that we've collected, what would you like to change, modify, or extend? Any thoughts?
I thought maybe she could change her like questionings. So instead of just asking follow-up questions, maybe use like where you have all the students' name on a paddle pop and pull out random ones to get like all the students involved, rather than just asking follow-up questions to the one person to get them all engaged.
That's a great idea, Cass. Yeah, I love it. Really good. Anything else?
I thought about like, because not many students asked her questions, if she somehow built like connection with the students more so they weren't afraid or they were going to ask questions to her, sort of thing, or whether that's if she goes around and asks them individually if they don't want to speak up or something like that.
Yeah, another good suggestion. Yeah.
I didn't like that when she did ask, does everyone understand? Of course, no one's going to answer that because you look like an idiot if you don't understand. So I just don't like when teachers ask that question because you're not really going to get responses, even if people don't understand. So
Yeah.
I would have changed that.
So I guess we need to think about opportunities for students to ask questions. So I guess one of the things that is really important is to provide non-verbal opportunities. So Cass suggested one. Another one is to use ICT question and answer things like we do online. You could use a question and answer Padlet. Ben has suggested open-ended questions. Yeah, definitely use questions that are more open-ended. You could use the think, pair, share strategy that we use a lot, especially in lectures. So putting students in groups, getting them to discuss in pairs first before then breaking out. So, you know, get them to talk about their prior knowledge about protractors. What do you know about protractors? Talk to your partner about it, and then to break out as a group to get them feeling comfortable to set the scene in terms of questioning. I think the teacher needed to show more enthusiasm. I think needed to think more creatively. Another one is, do students actually know how to ask questions? Do they have the correct vocabulary? Teachers need to make questioning for understanding and clarification an everyday strategy. It needs to be something that they're provided the language with. Joey says, provide more chances for students at the back from the observation data. I love the way you've used observation data. Well done, Joey. Students near the teacher tends to be more engaged and get more opportunities to answer questions. Excellent. So where you place the students as well. I used to display questions, suggested questions, and I would always talk about, these are the kind of questions that you would ask if you needed clarification. So I had about 5 questions that I just have up on a little poster, and it would be, I'm struggling with blank, can you please help? I'm working hard, but I'm still not understanding. Can you help me? I'm not sure what I need. Can you tell me again? So some students may have heard, but then they forgot what the teacher has actually said. So also, as well as verbally asking questions, having them written up on the electronic whiteboard or the blackboard or on a little poster, so that if they have forgotten or they didn't hear properly, they can then look at the board, look at the questions, rather than having to put their hand up and saying, I wasn't listening, can you tell me again? Because no one's going to say that. Another one, can you give me advice about? So just something as simple as that. Or, I'm not sure if I'm doing this right. Can you explain it in a different way? That's a really important one, because sometimes you just don't understand something because, the way it's been explained, it's not, something that you're familiar with, the language, or, it's like our question that we had for the assessment task about reshaping. I said to students, how would you change it? How would you adapt it? So you might just need to use a different word or language. Or when we talk about representations in the assessment task, to explain it to students that emailed me, I said, well, what about, instead of representations, what about characteristics? So it's all about how you frame things for individual students' understandings. Emma said, I felt that erasing the chalkboard was a bit of a power play, as it took away some of their instruction, and felt it prompted a bit of a fend for yourself mentality. Yeah, I think I get what you mean, Emma. Also the way she spoke to Vessie as well, it seemed a bit, where she said, I haven't finished with you yet, come back, and I can just imagine if I had been Vessie, I would have been absolutely petrified.
Yeah, I just didn't feel that it did much to encourage them. It was kind of like, you're now on your own, the instructions are gone, go and do the work type thing. So if you've got questions, you've missed your opportunity type thing, in a very harsh way. She didn't do it that harshly.
No, but it was underlying. But that's not why we're there as teachers. We need to try and support all learners, if there had been students there with some developmental delays or all sorts of different reasons, she hadn't really differentiated for them. Another thing that I used to do in my year 3 class, I had some laminated table cards for students, especially those that I identified that were not asking clarifying questions. So I had a little card, a laminated card, a red dot on one side and a green dot on the other side. So if they were fine and they understood what they had to do, they just have that green dot displayed. But if they were confused or had a question or needed it clarified, they just turn it over and I'd see that the red dot was displayed there. So I'd just go over and say, oh, hi, Vessie, how you doing? Is there something I can help you with, mate? That kind of thing. So making it and talking about this to students as well, that it's okay for you to feel a little bit unsure, but I am here to support you and help you. You may even say, when I was a student, I didn't like asking questions. You know, I understand completely. Sometimes we can feel like people will think that we're silly or stupid, but you need to say, that's not the case in this class. All questions are valid and I'm here to help you. So really developing that trust. Molly said that we did the same strategy with green and red cups in high school biology. Yeah, so there's lots of different ways that you can do that. And it would depend on the level of the student as well. Thanks, Molly. Thanks for sharing that. Any other strategies that you might have seen in your schooling or you might have heard about in terms of encouraging questioning? It's really something that you have to establish in terms of your classroom culture. It's very important to make students feel at ease. Make sure that students don't fall through the gaps, because that's what happens. These students that aren't confident in asking questions and just sit there and have not a single understanding of what's going on, they're the ones that fall through the gaps, and we don't understand them. If we're not observing their body language, if we're not making eye contact with them, then we really aren't going to have that understanding. So how does this align to the professional standards? Have a quick look at the next slide. If you don't have the professional standards there, I popped it up here. I want you to just pull out. Nikki's got her standards there. Well done, Nikki. Pull out, have a look and see which particular standards this relates to. Just shout them out or type them on the Padlet if you're too shy.
Managing classroom activities, 4.2.
4.2. Yeah. Demonstrate the capacity to organise classroom activities and provide clear directions. Yeah. 4.1. Support student participation. Excellent, definitely. 3.5. Use teaching strategies. Yeah. Could even be like 1.2 and 1.5. Understand, know, students learn. Differentiate teaching to meet the specific learning needs of students across a full range of abilities. No worries, Jake. 3.6, evaluate and improve teaching programs. Oh, I can see a really important one, number 5. Have a look in number 5. Which one in number 5 do you think is relevant?
Would it be 5.4, interpret student data?
Definitely, because that's exactly what we've been doing, isn't it?
Yeah.
So identifying what we wanted to inquire about from our general observations in the classroom, and then developing some sort of data collection tool and then interpreting it. So well done, Angela. Excellent. Okay, so the next observation, sorry, I'm just rearranging my screen, was the second one was in a prior to school setting, with the observation intent or purpose being to develop skills and understandings in observing and promoting positive interactions between children. So the aim was observing the skills and strategies used by the supervising teacher. I loved this clip. I actually learned quite a bit from this guy. It was very cool. So what we suggested that you use this time, your data collection tool was an anecdotal record. So those of you that may have worked in early childhood and primary previously in one form or another, that you might be familiar with anecdotal records. So they're a very focused, short narrative account of a specific event or an incident or a specific behaviour. So they're not as formal as the first form of data collection that we did. So they could record an aspect of development or learning, so a developmental observation, or social interaction, or group relationships, so a sociocultural observation. They can be very, very detailed, like the example that I gave you, or they could be brief dot point notes, which is probably more what you're going to use on your placements, because, you know, very limited with time, so you're going to have dot points. In my internal group, we talked about ways of doing that. It was an early childhood and primary group, and we actually had some early childhood people who worked in prior to school settings, and we were discussing how wonderful bum bags are, and they're super cool too, don't you think? So you can have your bum bag, and you can have your post-it notes and your little camera and your you know, your pens or whatever you're going to use, all there, and you've got hands free then, so you can wander around and do whatever you need to do and pick things up and move children around and do things with resources. So it's hands free. Or you could have a clipboard and then have your things all over the classroom, which doesn't generally work. So you really need to, I know it seems like, why is she talking about this now? This is really important, you know, being organized and having things at hand and not wasting time. All those things are very important. So anecdotal records are often written up at the end of the day. Teachers often write them up at the end of the day from notes that they've taken using post-it notes from their bum bag, or possibly from memory. And this is so you can still engage with and participate with children and students, and especially if you're in an early childhood setting, in an outdoor playground, for example, you really will still need to be engaging with a group of students, and you also need to be monitoring carefully as well. So these anecdotal observations, they're generally written in past tense as well, as we saw in this very detailed example. So you framed your observation to explain to your supervising teacher the why, what, who, when, and where of your inquiry. So as a student on placement, this might be how you set it out. As I said in the lecture, it's very important that supervising teachers know what you're observing, and it's a really good conversation starter having it framed in this way as well, especially in the first couple of days of your placement, when you're really starting to get an idea of what's happening in the environment and the kind of strategies and skills the supervising teacher uses. Because even though you may have specific ideas about what you're going to do, the supervising teacher will have put strategies, routines in place already that you're going to actually have to follow. Because if you decide to do it differently, the students and the children are just going to go crazy. So you need these processes, strategies have already been put in place. So you need to model exactly what the teacher is doing. So it's very important that you do detailed observations about this. So data collection, what sort of strategies did you note in your anecdotal record? What did you see and hear the teacher doing? Which leads on to our so what, now what? What were some of the points that you noticed, those of you that did this observation? Anybody?
I didn't do this one as one of my two, but I watched the video.
Yeah.
And I just noticed that the way he like promoted cooperation between the students, especially when the little boy was getting a bit like worked up about something, he was quite positive and he would repeat his questions and like work on it so that it didn't turn into a big thing. He was like very open to whatever the students wanted to do.
Yeah, very much so. And as Ben said, yeah, was giving positive encouragement. Like, well done. Excellent. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Molly. Anyone else? He encouraged the polite request by students. Would you like to ask something? If you can ask a certain child if you could use the spoon. Yep. Thanks, Nikki. So who was that? Angela, were you going to ask something?
I think he definitely used open-ended questions, but he also used leading questions to sort of promote that positive behavior. Like he said, would you like to ask, I forgot her name, but would you like to ask her if you can use that bucket?
Fabulous.
So that do that.
Yeah, very good observation. There was so much. Encourage the children to problem solve. Excellent, Emma. Yeah, there was so much that happened in this. So he was really, I noticed that very early on, you saw that he really scanned the environment as well. He was sitting in the sandpit, but he was looking around. And that's what you need to do as a in your placement as well. Even though you're not responsible for the students, you still have to act as a teacher in the environment. So you would still, even if you're doing a detailed observation of an individual child, you would still have to be scanning the environment. I had a student that almost failed their placement because the teacher said there was a fight happening in the vicinity and the student just ignored it. And the response from the student was, well, it's not my responsibility. I was taking an observation, but you need to show that you are acting as a teacher would. So even though it's not your responsibility, you should have either gone and got assistance or you should have dealt with the situation in a positive way. Encourage children to problem solve. Excellent. So he encouraged and modeled cooperation. His phrasing and open-ended and also direct questioning provided children with time and with space, and importantly, independence to have a go themselves. So he didn't jump in and solve the problem. He encouraged them to do it themselves. I thought his voice and his body language were very, very calm. And I think that makes such a difference. You know, using that calm, quiet tone, relaxed shoulders, you know, not the, it's okay, don't do this, don't do that, you know, really making sure that you model being calm. He also used children's names and positive reinforcement as well. So as a teacher, a student teacher, so you in this environment making this observation, pretend that you were on your placement and you took this observation, what would your next steps be? What would you like to change, modify, extend, you particularly? And I don't mean extend specifically or change or modify in the environment, I mean to your practices. What would you do? Have a think about it. So you've seen the supervising teacher doing this. What would you then do? I'm thinking very practically. What would you do? Pretend you have a bum bag. So you take notes. What would you do with those notes at the end of the day that you've taken about all of these amazing things that the supervising teacher's done? What would you do with them?
You would use them to create plans for how you can implement those strategies in your practice and then use them.
If I had gold stars, I'd be giving them to you right now, Angela. Excellent. So after noting the strategies, you would reflect on them. You would think about how you might apply them. You might discuss them with your supervising teacher to make sure that you were on the right track. You might ask for clarification. You might ask for more understanding around why he particularly used certain strategies. And then you would include them in your written reflections. You would relate them to the Australian Professional Standards, and you would then, as Angela said, write them up in your planning, include them in part of your lesson plan or your learning environment plan as strategies that you would use with individual students. I would actually be thinking about what you would do with individual students rather than generally. So as a pre-service teacher on placement, try as much as you can to differentiate for individual students. That's really important. It's something that your supervising teacher will be looking. And then, of course, from that plan, you would implement it, but then you would follow up with evaluation and further discussion with your supervising teacher. So we can see that cycle happening. So observation, plan, evaluate, observation, plan, evaluate. And this would be the case with all of the observations that you've made of your supervising teacher that are really significant. Now, I am noticing we did take a bit longer with the feedback, so we are going a little bit over time. So I do understand if any of you need to leave, but I'm going to continue on. We've still got one final observation that I wanted to go through for those of you that did the secondary one. But you can watch the recording if you wanted to or you needed to move on. I understand completely. So the third observation, as I said, was a secondary one, and we have used this clip before, so you should already be familiar with it. Again, as I said before, we're using it in a different way. We're looking at in terms of how imagining that this is a supervising teacher and you're looking at how they use different strategies to encourage learner engagement. So specifically, skills to provide positive interactions and engagement. So that's specifically what we're looking for. Positive interactions and engagement. So this was the observation template that I suggested that you use. It's just a suggested format. I thought it was a bit more suitable for the secondary context and the data that you're going to be collecting. I could have also written down there, and you would in your observation, links to the Australian Professional Standards, which we'll look at as well. But you will find when you go out on your placements that your supervising teacher will have templates that you might want to have a go at, you can use. You might, you'll be provided with templates as well on the Blackboard site that you might want to use for observations. You'll also be provided with lesson templates, but it's up to you. I would try and use a variety of templates to see what you think is best, and you can even adapt them as well. There will be certain things that you need to have in them. So links to the standards, links to curriculum, differentiation for individual students, all that sort of thing. But it's up to you to develop them according to the particular context as well. So sometimes it's in your best interest to do what your supervising teacher is doing. So just checking the chat, Padlet. All right, so after basically this is what the framework, the observation framework that you would have explained to your supervising teacher again. So the why, what, who, when, and where of your inquiry. So for those of you that didn't do this observation, still have a look through this, and then what we discuss will be meaningful to you, including those of you at home. So the main focus, what strategies does the teacher use to promote positive interactions and engagement? So with that focus in mind, did anyone here do this observation? No worries, Angela. All right, so we have looked at this clip before, and the things that I noticed, what I saw, what I heard, was that her focus was on the behaviour. Her focus wasn't so much on the behaviour. If there were issues, she sorted it and moved on. Those particular attention seekers in the group. Her touch was light. She also used humour, and she smiled a lot, which I think was really encouraging. And the fact that she didn't actually focus a lot on the behaviour made it clear to the students that the focus was on the learning. So, you know, and her attitude, shoulders back, standing up straight, you know, head held high, all of those things make such a difference. So her body language was really vital in this one. So she used verbal and she used visual as well, with the little chart on the board. I did think, and I noted this last time we looked at this one, that she could have moved around more. I think her safe space was out the front of the classroom, but I think moving around more would have assisted with the student engagement. So, you know, I noticed that a lot of the students were calling out the answers, and for some teachers that may not be appropriate, but for her, she had bigger behavior issues to deal with. So she kind of, don't sweat the small stuff. I think it's probably her attitude, because if she was to reprimand every student for calling out, the focus would be on the behavior and not the learning. She used students' names as well, which I think is really important. They're the main things that I noted. Oh, Joey's got something here. She handles those distracted students dignifiedly and politely, which is not very interrupting because other students are busy working. Really good point, Joey. Yeah. She also provides reasonable consequences for unwanted behaviours. Very good observation. And she also kind of used the game to that advantage as well. So they could earn back their detention by getting the answers correct. So that was another way of engaging. So kind of making a game, gamifying the particular activity as well. Excellent. Thanks for that, Joey. Very good observation. Anyone else have anything that they wanted that I've missed? You know, every time I watch these, I learn different things, you know, things that you miss or things that you guys say that I would never have thought of because you're so insightful. No, nothing else. So if you were this pre-service teacher, what do you think you might do? So watching this, watching your supervising teacher, what are you going to do with this? Exactly what we did in the last one, possibly. Pretty much. Yeah. So just using what you observe your supervising teacher do in your planning. So noting those strategies and following up on them. That's what your supervising teacher is going to be looking for. Linking them to the professional standards. That's very, very important, because your reports, your interim report that happens in the middle of your placement and your final report at the end, everything is based on the Australian professional standards. So I always tell placement students to link what you're doing to the standards. So then when your supervising teacher is going through and grading you or giving you feedback, they can pull out where you've actually done that. A lot of placement students actually color code as well in their prac folder, which is a really good way of making it easy for your supervising teacher to see how you have actually met those particular standards. It's a really good way of doing it. All right, almost there, folks. So I think it's important to remember that, we've been introduced to observation and to this inquiry process as well, data collection process. And so from these observations, the practice of a reflective approach to teaching, it actually implies or gives us the possibility of challenging and changing our existing practices, and also our beliefs about practice as well. And possibly as a beginning teacher or a student teacher, your aspirations. So what you've started to think about now, in the early days of your study, how are you going to actually implement that in practice? So all of those observations that you're going to do are really going to help you put your beliefs into some sort of concrete practice. So the next step will be to turn these inquiries, these inferences that we've made, into detailed reflections. So this is what we're going to be working on in the lecture and then in the workshop in week 7. So next week, we're going to be focusing on those 4 R's. So really reflecting in detail on what we see in our professional practice and relating that to theories, relating it to your future practice. So the next steps in your practice, as we talked about in the lecture. All right, so wrapping up, looking back at our points that we looked at and we ordered in order of importance in the lecture, can you pull out any that you've used in observing in your data observation, your observations and data collection that you've done with these 3 tasks? What can you pull out? I think we could actually say which ones didn't we use? Which ones didn't we use? Probably identifying and read high quality scholarly work about education and critical implications for your own practices. Would you agree? Yeah. Joey's got a thumbs up. Thanks, Joey. Nikki had a nod. Excellent. Molly had a smile. All right. Yeah. So, and this is something that you will be expected to do as well, especially early childhood students. You really will be expected to make links to scholarly literature in your observations and your planning, and of course to make links to curriculum documents, so to learning outcomes. And of course, well, we did make links to the Australian professional standards, didn't we? So to a certain extent we did actually. So we've really used all those skills in some way, haven't we? We've worked with others to solve problems or tackled issues. So discussing comparing data, able to overcome feeling anxious, frustrated, or confused, quite possibly. Okay, so for next week, please, very, very important that you complete the pre-workshop activities. I really need you to be familiar with the 4 R's. So read the assessment task sheets. As I said, I'm not going to talk about it this week. I'll give you a bit of time to get over the first one, but then we're going to move on to the next one, and I want you to read it in detail. I think if there's anything that you may have learned from the first assessment task, not just in this unit, but across others, is read it carefully. You have to read it very, very carefully, the task sheet and the criteria sheet. If you don't completely understand it, you need to contact your tutor. It's very important to make sure that you do have a good understanding. So we're going to be completing activities to support your understanding of the 4R. We're going to do a lot of work on this. You're going to have the opportunity to reflect on observations that we provide, and you'll also have the opportunity to bring your reflections into your workshops and to get feedback about them as well, because it's a very scripted process, so you really need to practice it. I'm not going to go into any more detail about the assessment task. I promised you that I wouldn't. I'm tempted, but I won't. All right, any questions? Nope. Okay, well, I'm going to stop the recording, and I will see you next week. And as I said, your assessment task, it's probably be about a 3-week turnaround for that first one. So hopefully you'll be seeing that then. Okay, bye everyone.